Roll for Crit is made possible thanks to the support of viewers like you and our patrons on our Patreon page.
You can become a patron for just $1 a month at patreon.com/rollforcrit. Welcome to Roll for Crit. My friends, it has been a year. It's been a long, difficult year. It is now at its end, and as is tradition here at Roll for Crit, we are prepared to present you with our top 10 favorite board games that came out in the year 2020. A couple of disclaimers, of course, the one that we always give, which is that these are difficult lists to make. Things on our lists could probably shuffle around or be replaced at any given time. Some things we didn't get to play. We'll talk about that at the end of the show. But that's always tough, so we apologize if you take issue with our lists, because we probably take issue with them too. And the secondary disclaimer is just for this year in particular, because it was very hard to get out of the house and meet up with groups of people to play games in person. There are definitely things that either would have changed or moved around on our lists or maybe have been added to them were it a normal year with normal game nights. Which is not to say that any of the games on our lists are not great games that we feel strongly that deserve these titles, but I do think in any other year there probably would have been differences.
If it's something had to be played in person, it was much more difficult because we had to make sure we had to plan everything right with staying away from each other and then being quarantined in time. So there are definitely some games that could have made both of our lists or maybe only made one or the other because only one person got the chance to maybe experience it.
Yeah, or maybe some games that made it on there because there weren't as many candidates. But that out of the way, we do have at least 10 games that we strongly recommend that are our favorites of the year. Each of us has our own individual list. We don't know each other, so it's going to be a big surprise. But before we get into the board games, we also have to talk about a new addition this year. Well, if you haven't been keeping up with our channel, we introduced our new seal of approval, which we call the Critical Hit seal. And every game that is going to be in either one of our top 10s will be receiving this Critical Hit seal. Means it's a special game that we at Roll for Crit really, really love. And while we do not have an official position on our lists for role-playing games, this is strictly about board games, we do want to show some love to the RPG side of the tabletop playing field.
So in that note, we're going to decide actually together and choose one to be awarded this fantastic, prestigious award.
Yeah. And maybe going forward, we'll come up with, things may change, but this year, that's how we're doing it. So the one that we've decided together pretty easily for us that gets the seal this year is Alien, the role-playing game from Free League Publishing, which was, based on one of our favorite franchises, exciting sci-fi horror RPG with some really cool mechanics and in the way that it works things in thematically and gives your characters things to do and has also like a whole thing for survival and rations and, making sure you have enough oxygen to live. Really effectively captures those films, I think.
I felt like our actual campaign was a movie. And I was really so involved in it that I forgot that you mentioned at the beginning that someone would always be a traitor, so to speak, quote unquote.
Right, a secret
until
android.
Literally the last moment. And to me to be so absorbed into the RPG, I think is signs that it is built very well.
Yeah, agreed.
For what I'd want.
So let's get in that seal. So now let's get into our lists proper. We also, in addition to our 10 on our list, we do get one honorable mention apiece. Will, do you want to start with your honorable mention?
I do not, but I will.
All right.
And that's the Digimon card game. I think mechanically it's actually really fun and it helps solve a lot of the issues you may have from the randomness from other card games. It's also probably, I think, it's not the, but if we ever do a top 10 beautiful art pieces and games, it's going to be on there. I think each piece is unique. They didn't just copy and paste. I love the look of the cards.
Wow.
And I think it's great. But it is a collectible card game, and it was a pre-release that was released. I was even arguing whether this was a 2021 game, but I played in a tournament, and it was pretty obvious people had full sets It didn't feel very like everyone was playing very limited builds. So I decided it does fall under 2020, but not enough to make the top 10 list.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Not one I got the chance to play, but I feel confident saying I don't think it would end up on my list anywhere.
I think that is true. I want to play with you because I do want to see what you think of the actual mechanics of the system because I do think it's cool. But it's not going to be everyone's cup of coffee. It's also something weirder as a collectible card game. So
I like that you said cup of coffee instead of cup of tea. I like that. It's a good.
My brain.
That's better. That's got a good ring to it. I'm going to use that from now on. My honorable mention this year is a tough one. Usually I like to pick something like off the beaten path and weird. This year was hard because there were so many games that I felt like, oh, I just wish I could have given more time to them. And the one that's going to make my honorable mention is Under Falling Skies, which you reviewed solo play. It is a solo-only game. I only just got the chance to try it for myself, and I really liked it. It's a very puzzly, arcadey kind of space shooter where you're rolling dice and assigning them to different spots in the board to take on aliens. There's a whole campaign in it, and I got to have a taste of it, but I don't feel I got to play enough to really fully state my position on it, but I really enjoyed what I played so far, and I think it's my kind of game, so that's my honorable mention. All right, so should I start with number 10?
Let's do it.
All right, here we go. Now, we always take a long time getting to the meat of our list. We want to savor this. This is a big deal, this episode. So, my number 10, the first official entry, and the first, besides the RPG, the first ones that will be getting seals from us, honorable mention doesn't count, on my list is from Bezier Games, Whistle Mountain. This was a worker placement game with a lot of very unique elements to it, wherein you have to take into account what other players are doing. There's a tile placement portion of the game with a lot of different moves that you can make. So it doesn't really feel like any worker placement game that you have ever played before. It has a lot of depth, a lot of different types of tiles that you can throw in and mix things up. You're building these airships and moving them up a mountain. You're building machines and your airships are moving up a mountain. And all the time it's also being flooded, so you're on a clock. And I found that element very suspenseful and interesting and added a lot to the game. A lot of things to like about this one. Only reason it's lower on my list is because I lost at it and I'm not good at it. That's not true, but Whistle Mountain is my number 10. And if you think about it, if we're going from the top to the bottom, this is at the top of the mountain, so it's appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, you can watch our review on it. I was definitely very positive about it. It really does. It's interesting because you also have 3 different workers, and they weren't so different that you always felt like I only wanted to use this one, but you had certain card and abilities that would refer to them, like the balloon one, and it made you really feel like you had a lot of different pieces to work with. While it's only 3 workers, usually in other games, I feel like 3 workers can feel like, oh, I need one more or something. It just did a lot of fantastic things with it.
Yeah. So what's your number 10?
All right. So for me, my number 10 from Stonemaier Games, Pendulum. This is a game that is, once again, a worker placement, but is all about placing workers at the right time. For you see, there are going to be these sand timers that will be flipping back and forth, and you can only place your workers where there isn't a sand timer, but they can only trigger and do their abilities when the sand timer flips onto them. So it becomes all about balancing between the different sand timers at different paces. It was just such a different take, but using it more of the real-time aspect when we're so used to worker places being that or analysis paralysis reigns because you're like, I can put there, or I can put there, and you have also different game modes and also the components, but that's almost every Stonemaier game are top notch. It's just it was a great experience trying out something new.
Yeah, I mean, as we said when we played it, it's in terms of, new, fresh experiences, I don't know that there's anything more unique that came out this year than Pendulum. You could argue that, but it's certainly in the running for that.
It definitely adds a lot of spice there. I'll say that at least.
So
it's
yeah.
So I guess I'm going with our usual snaking method.
That's right.
It's time we go to number 9. And my number 9 is one of 2 games that made it under the wire here on my list, and that's Calico. This is a game where you'll be building quilts, and based on different patterns, you'll not only be putting buttons on your little quilt, but cats. There are actually cats that want specific patterns, and if you can get them, you'll score more points. And the game You have also golds as well on your quilt that you try to surround its big to make like different colors or patterns in them. And it just, we've had games like this before. We've seen the golds could be colors or patterns or both, depending on how well you score them. It felt like it made my brain work so much harder than most of those.
Oh yeah.
Throwing the fact, I think the components with a double layered board, the cats are just adorable. You know, it was a probably one of the biggest shockers for me. Like you see a game called Calico about cats, I'm like, oh, I'm sure I'd enjoy it. But no, I think this is not just the give it to someone who likes cats game.
Yeah.
I think this is just a great game.
In fact, I think if you give it to someone just because they like cats, it might not appeal to them as much. Like it really is more about the puzzle of it, and the cats are almost like, yeah, they're like a thing that's involved.
We actually joked that they need to be a reverse where you lose points because that's the cats putting their fur on the blanket or clothing, so it just gets more messed up.
That's going to be a new
Though
expansion.
that could be for any furry pet.
So now my turn to say my number 9, right?
Mm-hmm.
I will need to check in every time because I can never keep it straight. My number 9 is, and I'm realizing now how many worker placement games maybe are on my list, or at least spins on them. My number 9 is Lost Ruins of Arnak from Czech Games Edition. And this is a worker placement and a deck building game in one. And I loved the way it used those two mechanics together and did both in a way that I hadn't quite seen before. It's got this jungle ruins, Indiana Jones type of theme where you're exploring the board, and you are also trying to build up an upgrade tree as you progress, which I always love in games. And you only have so much time to make your decisions, but of course, as you go, you're building up sort of an engine within your deck, and it's the kind of gameplay I really like, making sure you're doing everything that you can in the amount of time. There's a lot of pressure to it, but when you pull off those combos and you get more and more turns as time goes on, it's really satisfying. And it's a fun theme, although it's not the most thematic game in the world. It's like enough that I enjoyed that aspect of it. So that's my number 9.
It's also got some great pieces to it, and I don't think you mentioned it, but I really love the way the lineup works, how it shifts over time.
Yeah.
I think I always get excited when they do something weird with the lineup and buying, because I feel like that changes so much of what deck building is about and buying. It's not just buy from the pile or the card you want.
You almost have to do that now if you're making a deck building game, I think. Like, to make yourself stand out, you got to do something different with it.
Yeah, something that's, well, I mean, any deck building game in general, but that's always a great start.
And then I'll jump into my number 8, which is also Calico. You had a number 9. I had it just a little bit higher for the reasons that you stated. It's another one of those kinds of puzzle games like Patchwork and these tile laying games where you're trying to arrange things in the right way. And I really enjoyed this one. I think it is just the right amount of brain burningness. It definitely will tax you a little bit, and you could fall into analysis paralysis. And there's also kind of an element of randomness, almost like push your luck too, because you're like,
oh yeah,
which can I get away with waiting to see if the right tile comes out or not? But I think what pushes this one over the top for me over some others is just the components are really nice, the theme is cute, and haven't had the chance to explore it fully yet, but it has all these interesting like achievements and scenarios you can set up, including for a solo mode. It's also a perfect game for, like, I would always keep this around as for like the non gamers who come over. I think even though there's depth to it and it can be challenging, the rules are very simple and it's like very appealing to people who aren't hardcore gamers. I think it's a perfect one to put on the table for, like your mom and dad or your cousin or whoever is coming over, that they can wrap their head around it and enjoy it.
All right, so that's our first shared game.
That's right. Well, I don't think it will be the last.
But I guess for my number 8, I don't guess, I know, I guess for transition, is Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion. This is the smaller, compact version that was initially a Target exclusive, and unlike its bigger, older brother, it's going to be, all the scenarios are in the book, no map tiles. You only have the 4 characters instead of being able to jump between different ones. And I think I dare to say, I think I enjoyed my experience playing through Jaws of the Lion than playing through Gloomhaven. I just feel so much nicer back when it's just like, open the book, there's your tiles laid out and stuff. And because everyone doesn't have to switch characters or anything, I felt like there's a bit more. You knew the game knew what characters are going to be there, or a little bit easier, and like they could actually refer to like, oh, if you're playing with this character, like you always knew that character was likely to be around. It was a bit tighter, so to speak. So, I mean, I know everyone loves so much content in the Gloomhaven prefers, and that's great. I guess I just liked it when it was pared down a bit.
It's hard to beat in terms of setup. It is way less of a headache to just take out a book. There's no question about it. Gloomhaven, the original one, we'd never played in time for our top 10 of that year. So this is the first Gloomhaven entry now to get that seal. So it's pretty exciting.
And I really do wish it was how I started.
Yeah.
Because it just makes things so much easier. But I don't blame them for that. This was like one of those things where, 2020 hindsight. I don't think it's a mistake on their part. But if you haven't done any Gloomhaven, I highly suggest this is such a great way to get into any of those campaign games. It's also probably the cheapest one.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a win-win.
All right. So you're number 7 now.
That is right. So for me, number 7 is going to Whistle Mountain. Once again, I really enjoyed what they did here. I think aesthetically it's beautiful. I think for the worker placement, somehow it tricks me, even though I don't have a lot of workers, to still feel like I'm getting everything I want. The way you build and flood things changes resource spots. I just think it does a lot right.
I feel like it's impressive in that it isn't super attention grabby. Like it doesn't have some crazy gimmick. I mean, I guess the water building up is a gimmick. Same with, to me, Lost Ruins of Arnak. Like neither of them are like Pendulum, where it's like this very, oh, this is something weird going on, or it's like very thematic in a weird way. It's just solid mechanics. Same with Calico too. They're just all like just well built, well executed designs.
Before we move on to Jonathan's number 7, I do want to take a quick note that if you ever get the game, see if you can find the werewolf on the board.
Oh man. Where's that werewolf at? So every year, pretty much somebody or other in the comments says, why don't you guys just make a list together, because your lists are always so similar? And I always say, no, it's not as much fun to I want to be surprised. That being said, my number 7 is Gloomhaven, Jaws of the Lion. So just right ahead of where you put it. And I completely agree with you. While I suspect that, Gloomhaven obviously is a much longer and deeper experience, there are so many things. Well, not so many. There's really just 2 or 3 things that this version improves upon, but they are significant enough to me, from the setup time to like little tweaks to kind of how some of the goals and how the AI works and things and how they introduce it to you. I also did enjoy the new classes that are included in this set. It just feels like they learned from the original Gloomhaven, refined it just a little bit, but you still get pretty much the same experience. And I really enjoyed that experience playing it. So, Jaws of the Lion, it's hard to go against it. That's my number 7.
Yeah, and I think if I were to ignore pricing and everything, and we were just to rank all these huge campaign games, I'd have to think about it. I don't know where Gloomhaven's going to end. But when you factor in everything else, though, and like being relatively easy to find, in mass market stores, the price, it's just so hard not to recommend this one.
Yeah, I agree. And that brings me to my number 6, which is, I'm sorry, yet another one that you already named.
The Digimon card game.
My number 6 is Pendulum from Stonemaier Games. So I put this a fair few spaces higher than you. I do prize it very, very highly, again, for how innovative it is. And I know it's somewhat polarizing, and some people really didn't jive with it, and a lot of people really don't like any form of timers or real-time elements in their games. I happen to usually enjoy that a lot, and this one just changed the way I ever thought about worker placement. And while the theme certainly suffers, because I just think there's not even time to think about a theme, because you're just moving stuff around on the board, it rewired my brain in a way a lot of games don't do.
Yeah, I put it, it's lower not because I don't like it. In fact, I
They're
feel
all
like
great
usually
games.
I'm not crazy about time elements, and I loved it in this one. it was hard to rank any of these, but
It's hard. It's always hard.
it's good. I'm glad to see you at least liked it because I'm always like, oh, did he put it on his list yet?
Yeah, right. We like to we don't usually communicate with each other. This list is really the only time we talk. Okay, so back to you for your number 6.
All right. So 6 for me is going to Far Away from Cherry Picked Games. In this game, you are playing as astronauts, but the whole idea is you have different missions you have to do, and you can't actually talk with each other unless you've built certain equipment. You'll come across these strange alien species that have different patterns about how they move and fight, as they're predatory and prey and run away. And it's just such this great fun. It's almost like a combination of a board game and RPG. You're living in the world because you can't talk with each other, and you have to actually, with the exception of like talk about how would the alien creatures move. It feels like you have to actually live in the world of like, well, this creature says it likes this, so I guess it would move this way. It's not certain, and maybe for some people they don't like it because it doesn't have that rock solid rules. But for me, it was just such a great experience of like thinking about how would this work in the nature of this planet, how would this creature act, and those kind of conversations were fantastic to have. And there's still a great game there, that with the campaign scenario. So it was just a fantastic experience.
Yeah, I think this is another one like Pendulum that is potentially polarizing because of its strangeness. And for us, that it worked really well figuring that out. That I really enjoyed like you, how it made us think differently about how a game can work.
All right, so my number 5 is the other game that I can think of that made it under the wire. And I know it's impossible unless Jonathan's not telling me anything to be on his list. And that's Viscounts of the West Kingdom. This is the 3rd chapter in the West Kingdom saga. In this one, you play as Viscounts, and it's sort of a deck builder, but also moving around your one worker that can make you decide what actions you can do. And it had all these crazy fun interactions in it involving you can either trade on certain space or resources, remove buildings from your board to get bonuses and put them on a board. And then there's a center castle where you're all going to be throwing workers that can trigger this cascade for every 3 workers you have there and do all these crazy kind of machinations. And then there's also a morality track that every turn triggers with everyone, but if it's your turn, you get the top. If it's opponent's the bottom. It did all these really fun, weird things that I think was a lot of fun, and I really hate that I only just got to play multiple games of right before this list and not with you, Jonathan.
Yeah, that's a shame. Well, last year, Paladins of the West Kingdom was another one we got in late that made both of our lists. And I love that game. Obviously they've got a great team working on these things. Mm. And this is one of my regrets. This is one that I wish I had the chance to play for sure. Okay. My number 5 is, maybe one of the few times in recent memory that I at least somewhat line up with the jury over at the Spiel des Jahres committee, because my number 5 is My City, the Rainer Knizia legacy tile-laying game. Another tile-laying game like Calico, but this time you are building cities with different shapes, and you have different chapters, and each chapter introduces new rules and stickers, and you're trying to get the most points in a variety of different ways, as things will be changing a lot as you go through. I just loved the execution of this one. It's a legacy game that doesn't feel, sort of like Jaws of the Lion, doesn't feel too overwhelming because it's not super, super long. It is competitive, but for me, it really worked. I found it exciting, and I was, after, even when I was losing many games in a row, I still found the new things being introduced compelling enough to keep me going. And just, again, for the innovation in this one, along with familiar elements, and even the fact that I think even just the basic replayable version of it that's non-legacy, I think is just a pretty solid tile-laying game on its own. So for that reason, this one is my number 5.
I think a big thing to point out, which makes it stand out above the rest of legacy games, is there are some that cannot be played once you finish, some that can, but you wait until you finish the game. But this one only needs 3 chapters?
Yes, once you get in,
relatively
it might
quick.
Be chapter 4 or 5, I don't remember. But yes, you are able to do that replayable. I mean, if you wanted to, you could just open the pieces and do it from the onset.
Right. But I don't feel like you're going to, compared to some of those games, I don't want to do the regular because I don't want to spoil the stuff. I don't feel like you're going to feel that guilty with this one because they designed it that you only need those early chapters in there.
Yeah, so that's a pretty cool one. My city is my number 5. And my number 4 is Fort. Number 4 on my list this year is Fort from Leader Games. This is a deck builder in which you're all a bunch of kids trying to build cool forts. You got pizza, you got toys, and it has some, we were talking about deck building games and lineups and things they need to do to innovate. This one certainly does that because while the deck itself is pretty small, your cards that you play can be drafted by your opponents. They can buy them, so to speak, into their own decks on their turns, which adds a whole new element of trying to decide what you want to play and how to play it because you maybe don't want them to take something that you have. And it's pretty quick playing. There's a lot of crazy icons that you have to figure out, but once you get your head around it, it's fairly straightforward. Super cute art and theme, and it fits in like a small box. For a game of this size, to have provided as much enjoyment as it did for me, I think that's worth noting. So that's why Fort this wasn't intentional, just a happy accident, but Fort is my number 4.
It really is so great to have a game that has so much in such a small package, and it's so much interest to be like, I want to play this, but I don't want you to get it. So it really made you think a little bit different than you used to deck building games. So much so that it is also my number 4.
Oh, come on.
So we not only have a similar game, but we have them in the exact same place.
4 for Fort.
Yep. It's destiny.
Yeah, it really is. Look, people, I'm sorry. Just deal with it. We didn't play as many games as we wanted to this year. Similar lists.
So moving up to my number 3 then, because it's so quickly just skipping through. We're going to take a look at another one that I feel so bad because this would have been on your list. I'm certain. And that's The Search for Planet X. This is a game that's all about trying to discover the most celestial bodies in the sky. Obviously, Planet X is the big one, the one that can help end the game. But it uses an app to help shuffle things around, and you can only look at certain parts of the sky at the time. You have all these clues, and you know that like planets can never be next to gas clouds, or there's only this many asteroids. And it's just all this really creative puzzle solving and looking at, oh, that person asked about this. They probably know about this then and stuff. And it was just such a blast trying to solve this over and over.
This is another one of my regrets for sure. I love this style of game, like Cryptid. Any of these kinds of games where you're trying to logically deduce stuff. That was very fun to me. So yeah, I would love to play this. Yeah.
In this, because there's so many ways to get points, it's really also about making sure you get other things right too. And you can sort of be first come, first served to guess, like, I think there's an asteroid in Sector 5. And maybe someone puts a guess there first, you're like, oh, they're first. But they can be wrong. And all of a sudden, because you put a guess there and it's a different one, you got the first place points. So there's so much more going on. It's much harder to feel like you're behind in info.
Cool.
Because there's so many ways to get points. So it's definitely a high recommend. It's why it made the number 3 on my spot.
All right. So now we're into your number 2, right?
No, I went from 4 to 3.
Oh, that's right. We went over 4 quickly because
I just went so quickly because I was like, well, it's the same spot.
Yeah, I'm like, oh my God, but we are getting into it now. So my number 3 then on my list is a big one, a big one. My top 3, are definitely my 3 favorite games of the year. I can confirm that. And this is Oceans from North Star Games, and this is the successor to Evolution, wherein you are building species of different forms of ocean life, and you have all kinds of crazy cards that you can draw that will give them their own traits and abilities, and you need to make sure you can feed them. And we liked the original Evolution a lot, but this one definitely, I think, improves on just about every aspect of it. The art is gorgeous. It works well, I think, probably at lower player counts or with a full group. The amount of cards, the way they separate them out into like an advanced pile and a lighter pile, and how there's so many that every time you play, you're probably only going to pick a few, so your strategy will change completely each time you go back into it. It is also an example of a game that's it's a competitive game, and it's relatively speaking, you could be kind of aggressive to each other, but it doesn't feel super bad the way sometimes Evolution can feel very disheartening if you're creatures are getting eaten. Just did everything right for me, and I'm looking forward to the expansion they announced already.
It fixed a lot of the issues we had with old Evolution. That was a big thing. I feel like there wasn't a game of Evolution where if someone got behind, it was like, yeah, eat them. It just encouraged picking on the person in last place. And this one, it's so much harder to do that. It was just an amazing experience, and I'm so happy that they decided to give Evolution another look and maybe tweak it up a bit.
Yeah, so that's my number 3, and now it's really getting scary. And I'm also really interested to hear what your last ones are, because you've said a couple that aren't on my list. So I'm like, wait, which ones of mine doesn't he have, or vice versa? But my number 2 is another real big one that came out somewhat early in the year, right around the time pandemic hit, and it was perfect for that time. And that's Forgotten Waters from Plaid Hat Games. Pirate storytelling game that is cooperative for the most part, revolves heavily around an app, and you are traveling through different scenarios, making decisions, having ship battles, another one that uses a book, and another one that uses worker placement for some of its core components. But it just does some of the things that I love the most. I love apps in games when they're done well. I love the pirate theme. I love heavy narrative elements in a game, feeling like you're progressing through a story, and the dialogue and the writing is really witty and funny in this one. And it's just a blast to play with friends, especially if you have a good sized group. I think you can play with like up to 7 players, or even just as a solo game. But having a good group makes this one an awesome experience. And it's another one I can't wait to go through all the scenarios in the base that we didn't get to play through, and whatever they cook up in the future too.
I mean, when you first told me about this game, I expected from like heavy story and some fun interactions from the previous Crossroad games. But it still has that, feels like a meaty, heavy game, but the writing is much more humorous. It just makes it feel so much lighter and enjoyable just sitting around talking. And then you find some weird thing of like someone with 2 eye patches. And you're like, what? It's just, it really was. And then they went through the extra effort so you could play it really well over camera. I mean, it's hard not to love this.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry to say, Jonathan.
How much did you love it?
That this is also my number 2.
All right.
We got 2 matching.
Yeah.
Oh man. Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
If you like the heavy based games, this is a game you got to get now, because it's going to be one of the ones that's you're going to feel not going to have to do so much work to try and do. Like you can probably play most games over camera if you put in the effort, which we have. But this game is smooth sailing, pun intended.
All right.
Outside of like just the tiles, you got a website that still has the great art, voice lines. It is the game that pretty much was able to take on 2020.
But only one game could be your game of 2020.
And that is right.
And it's your turn to tell us what is your number 1 game.
My number 1 game is going to one of the first games I played in 2020, and that's Oceans. To me, I was making this list, and every time I kept going back of which one of these am I still dying to have hit the table the most? And Oceans was such a clear winner. I just love everything they did in it. The art is fantastic. Everything about it has just been top notch. I am totally down for all the weird mythical stuff that's coming in the expansion. I can't wait for more weird things like that. It just did everything right for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm with you. I mean, it really is it's hard to knock anything about that game, really.
Yeah. I mean, there's a reason why it's high on both our lists, and it makes me feel really guilty that at least I'm hoping what's your number 1 that I did not give it, I think, the respect it does deserve too.
Well, you're probably correct about that, but yeah, and I will reveal it right now. So I got to give you my number 1 game of 2020, which is indeed one that was already named earlier in the show, and that is Far Away from Cherry Picked Games. This is such a unique game, and I feel like that's something that's been repeated a lot this episode, and you can tell that's something that I look for in games, is what do they do that's new and different. And this is a strictly 2-player sci-fi exploration game. Also has a great sense of humor, although most of that is in the rule book. Although there's some in the missions as well, because this also has a campaign that you play through as you go. And like you said about the way that you control the alien creatures in more of a role-playing element, I think is such an interesting hybrid of traditional board game play and RPG play. And if you get in the groove of it and you're into that kind of thing, I think it's very rewarding. And then the other element of this, which is that with two players, you're not allowed to communicate with each other unless your pieces are physically on the same hex together. And it creates this very cool atmosphere where when you depart, you have to figure stuff out on your own. And when you get back together again, you can talk about what happened and go over your strategies and plans. And it's something that most board games don't do. And for just two players, I think it has an awesome vibe that works great as almost like a team building exercise as well. And it's also just the kind of gameplay, like exploration based, that is in a lot of my favorite games like Robinson Crusoe, and new elements that pop up through the campaign and the different missions. It's everything that I love, and I love that I get to say it's my number one game, honestly, and that it's from Cherry Pick Games, who are, a lesser known indie studio. And I love that they really knocked it out of the park, and that was my favorite game, and that we can give them some love as opposed to some of these bigger names that everybody's familiar with. I think this is a very under the radar title that deserves to be looked at by more people.
I completely agree. I mean, honestly, I feel like Cherry Pick usually is very satisfying for us. I don't feel like they feel it's like a one and then the rest are duds. They may be different and weird sometimes, but I still feel like because of that, it's in a very good sense. It's like, I've never tried this before. This is interesting. And this game has that. It is such a unique pick of a game. And if you have two people like you and one other person to play with, it's such a good pick.
Yeah, so all of the games that we just named, regardless of position on the list, if they're 1 through 10, they will be getting our critical hit seal. They're all critical hits in our hearts, no matter where they ended up. So let's take a little look. So we had a lot of things in common, and I expected that because, like we said, we didn't get the chance to play as much. Almost everything we played was with each other, so that's why there's so much in common, even more so I think than usual this year. But Fort and My City, I think, are the two on my list that are swapped, and you had Planet X and Viscount. Oh no, you had Fort. That's right.
Yeah, that was one of our ones at the same number.
What didn't you? What was on my list that wasn't on yours? My City.
My City.
Lost Ruins of Arnak.
Lost Ruins.
You didn't have that one. Okay, so My City and Lost Ruins we swapped for
two that
I
feel
didn't
like
play.
Definitely would be. At least I know the search for Planet X would be on your list. It's got everything you like. It's got deduction. It's got an app-based system. It's nothing. I don't think it's like you said with Calico, where it's brain burning because you're thinking everything, but doesn't like do too much that you feel stupid, like guilty.
Right.
It just does, I think, everything right for you.
And I knew that My City and Lost Ruins I liked more than you a little bit.
I do think they're still, I'm glad that you picked them because I do think they're worthy of them. I wasn't as crazy about some of the elements with My City, and Arnak was just like, I just felt like it was putting a bit too much pressure on me. But
right.
That's just
you don't like all that pressure. So tell me, what are some other games, some runners up that didn't quite make your list, but maybe you want to shout out?
Planet Apocalypse. I needed to play that more, but I really did enjoy it because it was a very interesting tower defense like game. It has lots of customizability. With the way your hero is also moving around too. Usually tower defenses, you're just stationary towers, and with the different demons. So it does have a lot going for it, but it is one of those games where you play for a long time and you're like, all right, I'm done. It is taxing. It's taxing in a good way. Another one you said too, Under Falling Skies. I think it's a great solo game, and I can't wait to see what you think of it, the overall experience.
Yeah,
but definitely one to go out there. Ohanami, I think it was a great small game. I really loved the number matching and trying to draft the cards. So I do think it was a really great one from Pandasaurus, and it definitely, part of it is because it did more than I expected.
Yeah,
like I was more entertained by it, so it was definitely in the consideration pool.
Okay, I'll quickly mention a few that I also enjoyed. My biggest one that part of me was like, well, it's almost in expansion territory. In fact, you might say it is an expansion because I think it does require the base game, but I'm still going to mention it as a runner-up, and that's Hostage Negotiator Career. which is like the campaign mode for the solo game of Hostage Negotiator. I didn't get to play as much of it as I would have liked, and I think it is like weird enough in its own category almost that I don't know if it would qualify for our, because we like to stick to just core games. A few others that we played that I just think are good games. I know you like this one, Tang Garden, which
That
was
one, it was pretty solid. Yeah, it was really
that's
fun tile flipping and stuff.
yeah, another tile placement game. You have like a shared space, very interesting stuff. Warp's Edge, which was the bag building solo game that I played from Renegade Game Studios, another cool sci-fi theme with some fun ways to mix it up as you play. This one, I'm kind of surprised that even it's a runner-up, but it was a solid game. Aliens Bug Hunt from Upper Deck, for being a lighter, not super thematic take on the Aliens movie, it got that across pretty strongly, and so I really enjoyed playing that one. And then there are two I want to mention that are like uh, they almost are regrets, because I don't know how much they count because they were like Kickstarters and may or may not have been available, or we just didn't maybe play the final versions of them. And those are Imperial Spells and Steam from Level 99, which we just played a demo of like a while back, which is just a really cool train laying game, but very different sort of a take on that genre. And the other one is Mechanica from Resonim.
That's in my list of like big regrets.
Yeah, which we played
love
so
the demos so
the,
much.
Yeah, the prototype copies. Didn't get the chance to really spend time with the final version of it, but it's a really cool engine building game where you have like robots going through conveyor belts and stuff, and even the insert is used as you play, which is awesome. That's really fun. All right, so now let's get to ones that you didn't get to play. What are your biggest regrets that you wish you got to play this year?
Well, I'm going to start off with one that we started playing, but I don't feel comfortable enough to put on a list because we didn't really get to the meat of it, and that's the Sherlock Holmes and the Baker Street Irregulars. This is the newest chapter in the Sherlock Holmes series. Well, we did fail miserably, so to speak, in solving the first case, but it was still, Sherlock Holmes is my number one pick.
Of all time, your favorite game, the original one.
So odds are this probably would have made the list if we made it through the entire thing, but other regrets. There are so many, so it's hard to narrow everything down.
Run through them if you'd like. Yeah, whatever.
Tidal Blades, Heroes of the Reef.
Heard a lot about that as well.
That's not one I haven't had. I'm like, I should have backed it, but I didn't. And another big one that I didn't get is Sonora, the roll and write from Pandasaurus Games. It looked so weird and different that I wish I really got the chance to try it out. And if we went to Gen Con, we probably would have. I do have one on here that I do have on a shelf. Well, not on a shelf. It's actually sprayed across the table right now. But, we didn't get the chance to play it in time. That's Etherfields. Though I'm a little hesitant from what I've read about it so far and trying to teach it that this one might not have made the list even if we did.
Well, that's ominous, but that's the big Awaken Realms, like exploration, sort of almost Seventh Continent-esque type of game.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, it's the kind of thing we love. I've just have not heard nearly as many positive things about, which makes me worry. But of course, I got to play it.
Yeah, who knows? Sometimes we're suckers for things nobody else likes. My biggest regrets, in addition to the ones you named, probably the top of my list is Dune Imperium. I really wish we had been able to get a copy of this in time. Everything about it looked like another cool twist, again, on deck building and worker placement, which seemed like the genres to mix up this year. And I've read Dune for the first time this year, so I was excited about that. And I've heard great buzz about it, so that was a big one for me. Evil Dead 2. I don't know if this would have made my list, really, but I have to mention it because it's one of those games that there was no way we were going to get to play it this year because you need more players to get the full experience. It's a hit and roll game, and we couldn't make that happen, but that's one of my favorite movies, and this game has been in the works for so long and gone through so much crazy stuff that I was disappointed we didn't get to play it. Godspeed, I'll name another one from Pandasaurus, is one that I heard a lot of good things about. Another like weird sci-fi concept, also worker placement, I believe. Star Wars Unlock, I want to mention because I feel like that would have been a good honorable mention for me, because I love Star Wars so much, and this is a series of escape rooms. I'm excited to hopefully try that at some point. And the last one is Cosmic Encounter Duel, which feels like it came out years ago because 2020 has been so long. But Cosmic Encounter, the original, is one of my favorite games of all time, and I'm curious to see what they did with this 2-player version and how that plays. Didn't get the chance. Well, why don't you say what was your expansion you wanted to mention? Then I'll.
Yeah, the expansion I wanted to mention was actually the Power Rangers Heroes of the Grid, the Rise of the Psycho Rangers. Because this does what you want. Expansion adds a whole bunch of content that you can use just with the base game stuff, but also adds like someone can control their mastermind. The Psycho Rangers are completely different. They have like different modes of whether there's a henchman or a boss, and they come in and do a bunch of different weird things. It's one of those things that adds a lot to your game that I think was really fun to play with.
Fair enough. So, then so looking back at our overall lists, something that kind of shocked me this year was neither of us have any games on our lists from Fantasy Flight. And in years past, I think last year, 3 of my 10 were Fantasy Flight games. They're usually one of my favorite companies. They usually make games that I love. And most of what they put out this year was just expansions for their existing products. They didn't really have that many new games. So that's a little disappointing to me.
Unfortunately, yeah, that's really worrisome right now. It seems to me that's really what they're focusing on now. And I get it with the LCG packs. You know, you don't want a new LCG each year. That said, you know, they have plenty of great board games that were just standalone, and some of them that desperately need either a reprint or a reboot. Yeah. So I'm hoping this is not what we're going to see from them from now on.
Who knows how much of that was impacted by COVID and other companies too. You know, some games might have been out already that aren't out yet that could have been contenders because of all that stuff. But overall, I will say, you know, at the beginning of this year, like by like August, I was like, I don't know what's going on my list this year because there's maybe like 3 games that we've played so far that I really like just because we weren't playing that much. And in the back half of the year, there were a lot of great games that we got the chance to play and filled out to a good year. So I overall am pretty happy, but it definitely was a smaller selection than I think we got last year at least. But you know, I don't let that take away from our lists for people watching. I still think I don't feel like any of my picks are like, there was nothing better. Like all of them definitely still deserve to be in these positions, in my opinion. So those are our lists. That's it. Very exciting to end off kind of a bad year for pretty much everybody.
This is supposed to be double crits.
Yeah, right. It was not the year of the 2020. It was the year of the 1-1. But sometimes that's the way it goes. But fortunately, there were still some cool games, and some of these had good ways to be able to play them online too, remotely. So that was something that happened, and a lot of crazy things happened this year in terms of how we got by and how we made do with streaming and stuff like that. Still, overall, some gems in there that I think you should go back and try out for maybe 2021, when, fingers crossed, people can get together more often and more easily. You'll be able to. You'll have now this curated selection of things you maybe missed to look into.
So let us know what you think of these critical hits, and don't forget that RPG in the beginning as well.
Yeah,
and let us know what maybe your top games were, what you were able to play, and I'd love to hear whether you still focused on the newest hotness or decided to maybe take a look into the past.
Yeah, who did you play with? Or you're lucky enough to be quarantined with some family members so you could play a lot. Maybe you even played more this year than you usually do, depending on your circumstances. Let us know what your favorites were from the year, and you can see our full list of critical hits from all years past at our website, rollforcrit.com. But that will be it. This will not be our last video of the year. We still have some more coming out next week, including a live viewer comments. So, you know, subscribe, all that stuff. Stay tuned. You don't want to miss any content. But this is our big finale before the cool down period. So we thank you for watching.
Right. Thank you so much for enjoying our channel so far. And hopefully you agree with our picks, or at very least understand them. Until then, I'm Will.
I'm Jonathan.
And this has been Roll for Crit. Never miss out by liking and subscribing. And you can also check out more on our Patreon.
We do weekly podcasts on Patreon. Don't you want to sign up and hear more of our voices?